See, check 1 2, check 1 2. Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. Office hours with MoGraph Mentor. I'm Michael Jones. If you're hanging out or checking this out on a recording later, thank you so much. Today I want to briefly talk about pricing your work in motion design. This is something we discuss with students of the mentorship and the various classes quite a bit. It's often a difficult question. I think the answer is pretty simple, but there are some specific things that we need to probably be aware of and talk about. So Clark, what's up, man? Hello. If this is an area of interest for you, I would love to hear your thoughts within the live chat here, or leave us a comment if you're checking this out later. So really the big question of how do we price our work in motion design? Let's just jump right in. Everything starts with day rates, and we're going to do a mock budget here in a second, and we're going to see how the key variable is this number here, is the day rates. So if you are not sure about this, this is really the thing you need to solve for, right? It's going to be hard to construct a budget revolving around your time and creating a profit margin if you don't have a sense of what your time is worth. And of course, this is a very specific question, but generally speaking, within our industry, there are some kind of tiers, and it's different in the United States, and it's different internationally, of course. But the absolute cheapest end of the spectrum in terms of junior artists, typically you won't see it in the United States, but you'll certainly see it in other places, as low as $200 for a day, maybe up to like $350 a day. $350 a day is a pretty common day rate for a junior motion designer in the United States. Somebody who's mid-level, who has some experience, maybe somewhere on that spectrum of $500 to like $750 a day. And then as somebody becomes really in demand, and that's not correct, not 900 to 100, but to 1,000, maybe closer to $1,000 a day. And of course, that can go way, way higher. I used to share an office with a senior motion designer who really just had one big broadcast client, and he was charging them $1,600 a day to come and do work. And they would literally sit over his shoulder and cut promos. And so it was like a very long, stressful day for him. So he was charging this $1,600 rate. So again, these are like broad averages. It depends on your client. It depends on where you are. But I think if you're falling into here somewhere, then this gives you a sense of how you can kind of construct a budget. So Clark in the chat says, I was actually curious about a tangential topic of being able to convey your skills capability when advertising yourself. That's a great question, Clark. Let's come back to that. I don't have a ton of slides here. So we'll come back to this, but this is the key variable, right? And let's actually just quickly do a mock budget. Let's say a client reaches out, they want a 90-second video. Let's say I'm a mid-level artist. So I'm going to charge $500 or $600 a day. Let's say $500 a day to make the math a little bit easier. Basically, we just need to do a cost analysis of the project. And because we're using day rates, it's actually kind of number of days. So let me make sure I have a layer here. Now we need to figure out how long is it going to take to produce this 90-second video. So let's just start. Let's say I need 3 days to do some like scripting and some initial pre-production organization. I need to look at the brand guide. I need to look at all the assets that the client has. I'm going to need maybe another 3 days to do some storyboarding. If everything goes well, that's pretty tight, but I think maybe we could get all our storyboarding inside of 3 days. Now, from here, maybe we're going to need something like 10 days to design all the assets we need for the 90-second video. And then maybe I need something like 15 days, 15 full working days to do the animation. I have chicken scratch handwriting, I apologize. Animation production. And then maybe, let's say I need to be able to build in 2 days of sound design. And so, but let's say I'm not going to do the sound design. I'm going to need to farm that out. And let's say the sound designer actually charges $1,000 a day. So it's actually going to cost us $2,000 to get this thing sound designed as well. So obviously now with each of these, we can start to put together like a Gantt chart, think about how long it's going to take us to produce this. But also we're going to start to be able to get some numbers here. So I know if my day rate's $500, basically I'm asking for $1,500. For this portion, I'm asking for $1,500. Here, I'm asking for $5,000 for all the design assets, and then 15 times 500 should be $7,500. But I will quickly bring up a calculator as we get into some of this math here. So I'm looking for $7,500 here, and I know I need an extra $1,000 for that sound designer. Oh, excuse me, we need $2,000 for the sound designer there. So I'm going to come to my calculator and find an initial budget on this thing. So let's say 1,500 plus 1,500 plus 5,000 plus 7,500 plus 2,000 gets me to a cost so far of 17,500. And so that gets us to 17,500 on essentially labor costs, right? That's all we've really accounted for. Now, this we've not made any profit yet, right? We have a job, we're working for a living here, we're trading our time for the money. The next step is we need to decide a profit margin, because we're not fully always going to calculate our cost of sales into our day rate. Part of it's there, but we have to pay taxes, we have to buy insurance. Maybe I don't know when my next booking is coming. If I'm running a studio or a business, there needs to be some money beyond the actual labor costs, right? So let's say we are targeting a profit margin of 30%, which is not extremely high, but also not extremely low. And so to add this line item for profit, we need to come back to our labor costs and calculate what a third of that is. So we need to go to that 17,500 and actually just multiply it by 0.3 to add this number here, 5,250. So this is going to be my profit for selling the work. And then I need to add that back in to my 17,500 for the project, which takes me to, so plus profit, to $22,750 to do this 90-second video. Now, if there's anything that we're leaving out or forgetting, if we're going to hire out or subcontract maybe a really great illustrator to work for 3 days and they're charging $1,000 a day, then we would need to reflect that. But let's say I'm doing everything at the $500 a day rate. Now, again, we come back to this idea of like, well, this is a very powerful variable, right? Because the whole project's being multiplied essentially times that day rate. So they're getting a pretty affordable film here if I'm only charging $500 a day. If I'm a little bit more senior and I'm charging $900 a day, right? That's like roughly a 40% increase. Then it's going to be a lot more than this, right? So that underlying key variable is going to drive essentially what the labor costs are going to be. Now, what we've just done is do a cost-based pricing. And of course, you're going to hear this from a lot of people. There's value-based pricing and there's cost-based pricing. Cost-based pricing is you add up the cost of the project, tally it up, what's your profit margin, you get that number, hey, that's what it costs. So when the client says, what does it cost to produce this? Well, it's just your day rate and then the time it's going to take you to produce it. Value-based pricing is a question of what is it worth to the client. And guys like Chris Do have done an awesome job on his YouTube channel and various other places, really outlining this concept of value-based pricing, which is what is it worth to the business. So this is a little bit tricky for motion design, and guys like Chris Do who have done branding work and like agency branding, it's a little bit easier, in my opinion, to do value-based pricing for branding because it gets replicated so much. It's not like a one-off usage, right? It's not like one video that opens the staff meeting or the big web conference that the company's doing. They're going to use it one time and never touch it again. How valuable is that video in the grand scheme of their business? It's maybe not that valuable. It's like a nice to have, but it's going to be hard to tell the client, sorry, I can't charge you $22,750. I actually need to charge you $100,000 because I say it has that much value. When it comes to branding a company, where that logo, that brand identity, that brand system that the agency creates for the business, it's across TV commercials, packaging, physical media, wayfinding systems, the buildings themselves. Like, there's so much downstream collateral off of branding material that I think you can get into those discussions of value-based pricing to say, hey, I'm not going to design you a logo for $10,000. I'm going to charge you $500,000 for your brand system because you're going to use it for the next 7 years and it's going to permeate every single piece of media you do. So it's exceptionally valuable. When it comes to a piece of media, when it comes to a video, an advertisement, obviously some things are more valuable than others. If you're doing a television ad that is going to be seen by millions of people, then maybe doing my simple, cost-based budget is not the way to go, right? Maybe you're saying, look, this is going to grow the revenue of your company potentially by millions of dollars. We're going to create this amazing media that's going to be so valuable for you that I can't just do a cost-based model. So I do think there is that opportunity to have those discussions around the value of the media. However, it's kind of interesting. I've been on projects recently where it is that kind of example of, oh, we want to make a video because we're doing a big Zoom conference with all our employees around the world, and we just want to have a nice video to open the meeting. Well, that's a one-off usage of that video, and very often you'll see the client like put it on YouTube. It's got like 14 views, and really nobody cared, right? It was nice to have, but you're gonna get nowhere if you tell that client, hey, go ahead and give me $100,000 instead of that $22,000 because I'm saying the value is so high. So value-based pricing is great. I absolutely think artists should be keeping an eye towards the value of what they are creating for companies. But sometimes we're creating things that are nice to haves. And so there it's like, well, we're just going to lean on the cost-based pricing, right? Like, what does it cost to actually produce it? And so that can be a little bit of a tricky question. But really everything just comes back to this key variable. What is your time worth? Depends on where you are in the world. If you have extremely high cost of living, well, there's only so many hours in the day. You have to absolutely charge more for your time. If you live in an area where $200 is a huge amount of purchasing power, well, then maybe you have a comparative advantage against someone who lives in a more high cost of living kind of part of the world. So obviously you got to find the rates that are right for you. You've got to feel out the supply and the demand. If you're asking $1,000 a day, but no one will book you for anything, well, move that down, right? Like until you're in a position to get some more pricing power, which means you're getting multiple inquiries. And right, like for my own career, I never felt super comfortable turning away legitimate opportunities to work if it was close, like if it was ballpark. If I wanted 20 grand, but they had 15, I'd probably find a way to shave a day or two out of there and do that project. If I think the project costs 20 and they have 5, well, okay, won't be able to do that, obviously. So I think there's also some part of negotiation, the expectations of the clients. Big clients expect to pay a lot of money. So actually with larger clients, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you don't really price everything in. If you give a number that's too low, they're going to think this person doesn't really know what they're doing. That they just really want to do the job, and that actually makes them nervous. Smaller clients are really the ones who often want to haggle and say, oh, this is our budget. We only have so much. Can you work with us? And then those are going to be your judgment calls, of course. But for a 90-second video, for a mid-level day rate with an actual kind of profit margin, so you have some cushion on all your cost of sales and all those little expenses that are kind of happening in the background that need to be accounted for. Plus, you need some margin, right? You need to make some money to save for the future, to give yourself a little bit of breathing room between projects. It's pretty common, or somewhere around this, $20,000, $30,000 mark to do that kind of work on a kind of mid-level day rate. So Clark here in the chat was asking, I was curious about being able to convey your skills and capabilities when advertising yourself. It's a great question, and really the simple answer is portfolio. Excuse me. And, portfolio obviously is everything in our industry. I'm actually in the midst of remaking my portfolio now. Let's see, maybe I'll give you a quick preview of how I'm trying to build this out. Gosh, my Chrome updated, and now, let's see. And when it comes to your portfolio, obviously what you decide to show or not show is kind of everything. Let's see. And, I don't think it bears a ton of fruit to necessarily spend a lot of time on like social media marketing for your work. Sorry, voice is too low. Check 1, 2. Thank you. Hopefully you can still hear me there. Right. So the way that I'm really trying to choose to market myself when it comes to freelance projects is to first and foremost try to highlight the bigger jobs that I've directed. So I directed a series of 5 different kind of 3D films for Philips Healthcare. So I'm starting there because my goal is to charge $1,000 to $1,500 a day to direct projects where I'm going to be responsible for hiring other artists, sending them money. I do see your note. Am I still that low? 1 second. Let's see. Hopefully nothing happened with the mic there. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. But Clark, yeah, I mean, it really is about kind of positioning yourself in a kind of specialty role. Like, I think people, you can say you're a generalist, but like fill up your portfolio with, a bunch of 2D samples that show your After Effects ability and like really distill that down, or show your ability to manage projects across styles, like show your ability to do 2D stuff, 3D stuff, visual effects stuff, stop motion, kind of live action stuff, logo animations, broadcast rebrands, 2D explainer video type things. I also think it's a nice idea, and I'm seeing a lot of artists do it, and I definitely recommend it, having little things on your website that show other fun development stuff, the stuff that you like. Maybe you didn't direct a project in that style, but you could see the potential of kind of selling that kind of work to a client. So, it's obviously a very simple formula, but like try to put your best foot forward when you do an about page. Just describe yourself how you want the client to be thinking about you. And then, I don't think you should be going out and buying any ads on any social media or anything, but just posting your work, right? Being part of the community, posting stuff on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, letting people see the various work that you've done is really the only path. And so it's about being consistent and about showing up and, quote unquote, being prolific, making a lot of work, and then navigating your way kind of through the industry. And it's funny how people kind of find one another, right? Clark, you could post some really cool 2D animation sample on LinkedIn, let's say, and I'm actually getting more bullish on posting your work on LinkedIn because there are so many marketing people and CMOs and operating officers who are on there. So those can be really a really positive place to make a good impression on people. And so that's, just show cool samples, show cool work. And so what that really means for us as artists is we just have to focus on the craft, right? That's really it. Focus on your craft, making good stuff. That's gonna have more weight and do more for you than any other kind of strategy. I mean, the only strategy is like make cool stuff, make cool work, be sure to share it, make sure people can see what you're up to across all these channels. I know how obnoxious it is to feel like you've got to be just posting stuff all over Twitter and Instagram. It's certainly a bit exhausting, but really primarily focus on that portfolio because when you are reaching out to studios and doing that kind of cold calling where you're saying, hey, I love your work, that stuff has a really low rate of return. So if the better work that you have, then the easier those discussions are going to be. So here in the chat, Robert B says, are there alternative business models besides landing a single project for a single client, creating animation assets for a marketplace like Envato? Let's see. And then Clark says, is there not any language to use when communicating in a circumstance like an interview? Yeah, I think just to answer Clark's question real quick, I think the language you want to be using is just the language of the industry. Part of our job is to be clear about what we can and can't do. So yeah, not using any noise removal. Hopefully you can hear me there. Aftermath. The language is just to understand, I'm an After Effects animator. That's what I can do. I can animate for you. Being clear that, hey, if you're looking for someone to do 3D character rigging, well, that's not what I do, because motion design is such a tricky term where people think it kind of encompasses all animation and all design and all illustration. And of course it doesn't. So just trying to be clear about your skill set, I think is the best thing that you can do. Robert talking about creating assets for marketplaces, for sure, there's a ton of money to be made in creating assets for the community, creating resources. I've been part of a project called Motion Sound that we launched in 2016 and sold sound effects. Me and my partners on that one, maybe a few $100,000 over this 5-year period have kind of trickled in through that experience. So definitely people are interested in stuff they can use, right? I mean, it took us like a year to do it, and now we've been maintaining the project. So make sure you want to be on the hook for doing that kind of thing. But right, offering training, offering assets, templates, there certainly can be money made there. I would think that doing templates and animation assets like on Envato is probably not going to make you that much money, just because there's like 1 trillion assets on those platforms. So I have to imagine the income is spread pretty thin across that kind of platform. What we did with Motion Sound, and I would recommend if you're going to really try to do some serious asset creation, is just try to sell it yourself. I probably wouldn't go through a marketplace like Envato. I would set up a Gumroad. I would set up your own WordPress website with a e-commerce plugin in there and try to sell that directly to people. Keep all that margin because it's definitely an uphill climb to be trying to sell stuff on those marketplaces. And so like with Motion Sound, selling these assets, we put together a little website that gives you a view of the sounds, tells you about the artists behind the project, and then gives you all these previews of all of the assets. And, this was like a pain point for me, was feeling like all the sound effects that I had access to were very cinematic and very for movie trailers. And so I wanted more categories of sound. And I worked with a sound designer, a Foley artist, a pair of Foley artists out of Seattle who were interested in the project and thought, wow, what an interesting niche to play into. So that's the other thing I would say is like, be as niche as you can with what you're going to sell if you have a specific asset in mind. Because if you're in this industry, solving your own pain points probably means you have something that other people would want. So as you're doing your own projects and going through your own workflows, if that means you could create a script, you could create a plugin, a series of assets, then that can be a really positive thing, right? At MoGraph Mentor, we did the Studio Art Asset Pack. Let's see. And, that was another pain point for me. I wanted to be doing, let me just pull this into here. I didn't want to have to like scan stuff every single time. So me and another artist, we spent a month just like creating these various assets and then scanning them in on a nice scanner, so that now I just have all these mixed media elements, gold inks, charcoal lines, like just all these little things that I can use to design and animate my own work. So again, it was born out of a pain point of wanting to do a specific kind of work, and it's very time consuming to get out your pad and do a bunch of dry media or wet media and other things like that. So definitely, I think resources and assets are a positive in our industry. I'm constantly buying other people's 3D textures, things like that. So absolutely, there's certainly a good business model to be had there. So yep, sorry about the audio issues. I know it's a little, it's a directional mic, so I need to stay a little bit closer to it. But in terms of pricing, right, figure out that key variable, figure out that day rate, try to truly think through the project constraints. And, it's easy for me at this point to quickly mock up a budget for a project I've done many times, right? Like I've been asked to do a 90-second 2D video, I don't know how many times over the last 13, 14 years. So for me, it's a little bit easier to determine how many days these various things are going to take. If you're newer to this and somebody says, hey, I need a 2-minute video, and you're like, I don't really know how long that would take, you may have to give them a scope, like a scope of work to say, look, here's what I think it's going to take. And look, on some of those first projects, you may just have to commit to a price and then learn the hard way, right? Like if you didn't charge enough, you're going to have to remember next time, like, hey, 3 days for scripting just isn't enough, right? Like it took us, or storyboarding, like it took us 6 days to storyboard. So there needs to be way more margin for that. Or, the animation process took way longer than we thought it would. That is something that kind of comes with time. But it definitely, it can be a learning experience. I think the good news about if you create this kind of outline for a client and obviously put it into a nice looking document for them, is then it creates some boundaries, it creates some expectations where then you can, and I always add this when I send a proposal to a client and I say, look, let's say it's this. Hey guys, the price is $22,750. That's what it's going to cost you to do it. I put a note at the very bottom of that says anything outside this scope of work will be billed at X number of dollars per day. So let's say the day rate's $500. I say, look, anything outside this scope of work is $500 a day. So let's say we do 3 days of storyboarding or we do 10 days of design, and they come back and they say oh, we want to redo all of it. And you say, okay, we're going outside the scope, just a heads up. If we can get that budget approved, then let's go ahead and redo all the design. But we did chew through our allotted budget for design day. So even if you're not 100% sure, just having any kind of scope is a good structure to say, like, here's what I will give you in terms of my time, and then you're going to figure that out and see if the scope plays out. So again, cost versus value pricing. This is a cost-based model. This is not really a value-based model. But let's come back to the questions here. Makes a lot of sense to do it that way, especially if you do subscriptions. Yeah. Regarding the pricing structure you stated earlier, would you state the profit margin on the invoice to the client? I usually do not put a line item for profit margin, although I know other people do, and I think that's fine. I think businesses, if you're working for a for-profit business, they're making a profit margin too. They have a profit margin target, so they're not going to say, like, how dare you, charge for a profit. I think it's totally fine to include that. I early on just got in the habit of just like blending that cost back into the project fee so that it just looks a little bit cleaner. So what advice do you have regarding sticker shock, right? If a client comes to you and you give them this $22.75 budget for a 90-second video and they're like, oh my gosh, that's insane, we can't do it. Well, that's what I'm saying earlier of like, are we even in the right ballpark? And that's where I basically never get my hopes up, or, either way. I have no emotional attachment to when someone sends me an email and says, hey, how much would a 90-second video cost? I'll spend 1 hour. I'm not going to spend a lot of time until a check has been, until a project's been greenlit. I don't want to spend a lot of time messing around with every email. So it's like, okay, here's what it costs. If they come back and they're like, oh, this is crazy. Okay, great. Best of luck to you. Maybe I could find you someone fresh out of college or someone who can meet your $5,000 budget. But if you have sticker shock about a $22,000 video, right, then we're not close. Then we're not aligned. So if you're running into sticker shock, hopefully just showing them all of the time that it's going to take and then telling them about your day rate will smooth out the sticker shock, because you can just tell them like, hey, look, this is what it costs for my time. This is how long it's going to take, right? Unless you think I should be working for $100 a day, right? Which is like damn near minimum wage essentially. Then, we're not close. So it costs what it costs, and there's really not much we can do about that, Bo. So if there's that kind of sticker shock, then it's probably not a good fit. I mean, I think the most interesting part of this, and again, guys like Chris Do have done an awesome job of talking about this and teaching about this extensively, is where we get into the value versus cost. And, I'm so far into the industry, I can be a little bit cynical. A lot of times clients produce stuff that isn't that valuable, right? It's like nice to have. And, I think the example was, hey, we're doing a web conference with our employees globally, and we're going to make this intro video, and it's going to be seen, and maybe people will be half paying attention, and then we'll literally never use it again. Well, that's not super valuable. And so then it's just like, well, if that's just nice for you to have, well, then we're just going to use a cost-based model. But again, if it's a TV commercial, if it's a logo animation, which I've done a lot of, logo animations are where I will do a little bit more value-based pricing, because I know that element is going to be used over and over and over across various videos, TV ads, other things like that. The way I like to do a kind of value-based pricing is just to dramatically increase the profit margin. So there'll still be, the amount of days that I'm going to work on the logo animation. Let's say it's going to take me 15 days to do all the different versions they want to see and all the exploration. So there's like some fee for my time. But if you're going to use this for the next 3 years and I don't get any royalty, well, then maybe I'd like a 90% profit margin. Like maybe I'm going to charge you 10 to 15 grand for my time, and then I want another 10 to 15 grand for you to get my After Effects project file, and now you own this logo animation. So maybe I want like 30K because you're going to use it over and over. That's where that value-based pricing that Chris talks so much about can be really relevant. So it depends. It's tricky because it's not like branding. Branding is always valuable because there's always so much downstream collateral. So Robert says, I'm curious about targeting those lower budget clients by reducing my time. What about creating template scenes for your own use, reuse. Yeah, I mean, we have things like Fiverr, we have things like Motion Array and Envato, and sometimes that's the best option, right? Like if a client has $5,000, I'll tell them, like, here's what we can do. We can go get a template off Envato that you like, and you can hire me as an After Effects expert to customize it for you. And let's say I charge $1,000 a day. Well, you can afford me for 5 days to tinker with that template, and everybody wins, right? They get the product they want. I'm not going to spend that much time. I always will tell clients the interesting thing about our field in motion design is there's kind of a solution at any price point, right? To an extent. If you have $5,000, you can still get a piece of media because we have the templates, we have the pre-mades. Like, it's not going to be that good or that special, but sometimes that's actually better for a business, right? If it's like a one-off use, going back to this example of just like a video opener to this online virtual conference or something, should companies really drop $30K just to make that element? If they're big enough, they want to do it because that's just their own expectation of who they are as a company. But smaller companies, and I'm never offended. Like, I'm not offended if someone's like, oh, here's the money we have, because we do need to sympathize with everyone who's running a business that, like, well, look, you have the money you have. I'm not going to judge you that you can't afford a $30,000 video like a larger corporation could. So just having that empathy, like, okay, that's your budget. What is the solution? And there really are solutions at every price point, to your point, Robert. Like, there are ways to serve those clients. I think going back to whose point was it? Robert again, talking about alternative business models. There's definitely, and I'm already seeing it, like I see the Instagram and the Facebook ads, there's definitely a niche for a really preset service, meaning, you say, look, for $5,000, you get a 60-second video, and it's in this style, and it's like this structure, and you kind of sell that same thing for that low price over and over, almost like a template, but a little bit more of a service, because, right, a lot of these companies, if it's like a business owner, they don't want to be futzing with an After Effects template. They don't know how to open it or change anything. So right, if you could create your own internal formula, and you see this with the kind of explainer videos, like explain your business for $5,000 or on Fiverr, give us $100, and someone somewhere in the world will make you a 60-second explainer video that probably looks quite bad, but maybe that's really all that client is kind of looking for. A nice example of this, let me just pull up my web browser very quickly. My buddy Josh, let's see. Since we're talking business models, so this would probably make Chris Doe absolutely sick to see this, so don't tell him. But my buddy Josh, who created basically a kind of formulaic service for logo design. So he basically tells you, he'll give you 1 week. He's only going to work on it for 1 week. So he's leading with the constraints, right? The constraint is his time. He's not going to spend a lot of time on it, but he will design you a logo, and he has a fixed price, right? Every single time. He's not asking you about your company. He's not asking you about the usage. He's just saying, hey, you want a down and dirty logo? Give me $1,500. I'll cook something up in a week. You don't get any revisions, and there's your new logo. Like, that's it, period, end of story. That's a really interesting business model. I think we're seeing that with motion graphics as well. Like, people saying, here's the constraints. I'm going to lock you into these constraints, and I'm going to set a price on it every single time. And then internally, I'm going to have a repeatable process that I do over and over, and have my own kind of internal templates and structures to produce a very specific thing. And I want to sell that over and over. I think these kinds of business models for motion designers, right, if you want to be doing that, which I think most motion designers don't want to be locking themselves into this kind of thing, but this is the kind of business model you can run a Facebook ad around, run an Instagram ad around, run LinkedIn promotional around, because that's the kind of stuff that converts. Like, if you're just a motion designer who's looking for individual client projects, running Facebook ads, Instagram ads, that's certainly, you should never be doing that, right? That's going to be all word of mouth. It's going to be all your networking connections to ad agencies, and on and on. But I think we are seeing a space for these more low-end clients who don't have the money, to give them something really formulaic and really, really structured and set. So I do think there's room for innovation. There's certainly so much that could be done in this kind of space as well. So I think it's a good point, Robert, to be thinking about various business models as well. So to recap, figure out that key variable, figure out your day rate, decide if you're doing a value versus a cost analysis. Cost is just adding up the parts and then adding a profit. Value is trying to engage the client in a process of figuring out what it's worth. You know, the value-based pricing, you know, think about illustrators, editorial illustrators. If you're going to do the cover of the New Yorker magazine, let's say, you in that negotiation are going to ask them, well, what's the run? What's the print run? Are you creating 30,000 versions, 50,000 versions, 100,000 versions? How many times are you recreating my art that I'm giving to you, and I'm going to charge you based on that? So it's like usage rights. And that's where in our field, things like logo animations, perhaps TV ads, billboard ads, things that have a whole bunch of usage, especially logo animations, right? Because it's an element, they're going to want that underlying file or that underlying render, and they're going to use it over and over and over and never pay you again for the privilege of using the thing you created. So I think there's room for that value, but 9 times out of 10 in our position, it's gonna be cost-based because we are offering a very custom service, right? Oh, you want a 90-second video that tells the story of your company or your product or your service? Well, that's a very specific kind of one-off thing. So we just need to figure out how much work is involved, how much profit's going to be made, and then kind of calculate that. And then it's really just about line items. You know, obviously, there's going to be big differences between like a 2D 90-second video and a 3D 90-second video, right? Like if this was 3D film, we would really need to redo this, right? Maybe we need way more time where it says design, right? Well, we might need to like do more storyboarding, but then we might need a whole bunch of time to like model assets or rig characters or design characters. So that's going to matter. Or maybe we need things like render farms, or I'm renting a cloud server to keep up with all the rendering that I'm going to be doing for the project. So those other costs can get into that line item, and you really want to make sure you include everything, right? Because you're going to do your calculation on profit margin based on your cost summary, right? So the more that you add into this cost summary, when you go to multiply by 0.3 and figure out, all right, what's my take-home pay? You know, what can I put in the bank? What can I invest for the future? We need to make sure that everything is logically represented in there. So let's see, a couple more questions. Thank you all so much for hanging out today and hearing me talk about this topic. Robert says, do you know anything about the market for data visualization? For example, rather than animation for one-off corporate presentation, doing something with repeat value like an animated sales report. That's a really nice idea, and I think there's definitely a ton of space in that data viz area. I think the data viz thing is difficult because I think you're right. Like a one-off report each year or each quarter when they do a report, I definitely think you could sell companies on like, hey, don't just publish a PDF. Like, let me come in and animate it and create animated assets that you can like embed into an online web page, so all your people or your shareholders or whoever can have a more engaging experience with this data. But since data is constantly being updated, it seems like you'd still be selling them on like each time they go to do it, because then obviously the next day the data's already changed, right? You have more sales or you have more profit or whatever. That's kind of a moving target. I definitely see the most clever, technically minded individuals, doing really interesting stuff with live motion graphics that could be updated, where they're using Lottie HTML exports and they're creating frameworks. So if that's an area of interest to you, I'm a big believer that the people who have a focus and they like really lean into that thing, like Robert, you could be You could learn everything about live motion graphics, data viz, make an awesome website about that, blog about it, really show your expertise and your passion for that specific thing, and then start reaching out to all these companies and saying, hey, the way you're doing data could be 10 times better for only, a little bit more money, and try to sell them on that. Maybe put them on a retainer. Maybe say, look, you're going to be doing your quarterly report. Hey, every 3 months, I'm going to be right there to do this, and try to get them on a retainer. That's a little bit longer than a one-off situation. I had a friend in Atlanta who, it was called Friendly Human. I honestly don't know if he's even still operating. Let's see. Friendly Human Video Atlanta. I assume he is still operating because he was really crushing it. Let's see, website. So this was kind of interesting. I forget his name. Gosh, that's terrible. So Friendly Human is a model where he's essentially trying to put people on a retainer, an annual retainer, to say, look, you don't need one video to talk about your business and your story and your product. What you need is like 52 videos, because in this day and age, just a single video, you put it on Instagram or you put it on Twitter, and like a day later, it's lost to the stream. It's like it never happened. So his strategy is to tell these companies, look, you need to be rolling out a new piece of media every single week. So you're really like engaging whoever cares about your brand online, right? Whoever's listening, more consistently. And so he pitches them on this annual, much larger retainer fee. And then he has an internal production schedule with him and his team to figure out how to make like clusters of media, where they'll take the CEO and they'll get him in front of a green screen or a nice background or whatever, and shoot enough content in one Tuesday morning to make 4 videos for that month. And so he's like compounding this, as opposed to saying, hey, let me sell you a video. He's saying, let me sell you a video strategy. And I think there were a lot of people who were very interested in what he was building and wanted to copy that. I don't think I've ever seen anybody really do that with motion graphics per se. But I think there's definitely space to be telling companies, because we're in such a rapidly changing environment, like going to companies and being like, hey, your strategy sucks, I'm here to fix it. Like, that's kind of what they're looking for. The people who are doing that, and now you need to have a real thesis about how you're going to fix that, to be like, look, it's white noise out there. Everything you're producing, nobody cares that much. Like, you need a different approach than just maybe doing this one-off thing. Like, that's going to be difficult, because in motion graphics, it's a lot of work, right? We're creating everything from scratch. If it's good motion graphics, it's a lot of work, right? It's design, it's illustration, it's animation. It's not that simple and automatic. So I definitely think like the live video component lends itself to that larger kind of strategy. But all that just to say, it's such a shifting landscape. And I think brands are super open to hearing from people like us, from various artists who are more plugged in, honestly, who have a bit of a sense of like, here's the landscape out there. If you're doing social marketing, it's rough seas out there. Whatever you think is going to work, it's probably not going to work that easily. Like, you may need to be a little bit more consistent with your media. And from our perspective, maybe that means just selling them more creative services. Like you're saying, maybe an animated series. Don't hire me to do a one-time data viz. Hire me to do a 16-week series where every single week you're putting a new little data viz GIF onto your Facebook timeline or onto your IG stories, or like whatever that's going to be. I think if you have that entrepreneurial gene, there's a lot of opportunity to have a kind of fresh perspective for these companies, and just starting with like, hey, I bet your video strategy is not working that well anymore. And 99% of companies are like, yeah, what's going on out there? No one's paying attention to what we're saying. And it's like, right, Facebook, Instagram, the algorithms have changed. The gross margin has so compressed. You basically can't talk to people through these channels without some really consistent strategy or a lot of money to promote the content. So I think there's so much we can offer in terms of our skill sets, but also if you're plugged into these areas where they want to reach people, bringing some of that perspective to can be really useful. So we're right at about 50 minutes here. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to hang out and chat a little bit. I know pricing can be a little bit anxiety inducing, and especially if you are new. So here's my big piece of advice. If you've like never sold a piece of motion graphics before and you absolutely want the work, what I would say is just be totally transparent with the client. Be like, look, what do you have, right? Whoever says the number first, right, the other person has more information to work with. So if you really don't know how to price something yet, but you like the client and you're like, I just need to do something, I don't have other inquiries coming in, I would say, okay, how much do you have? And then this is motion graphics. So like we said before, there's a solution at almost any price point. So, you know, if the client says, well, I have $3,500, and you think, well, that's not very much money, but okay, what can you do for that amount of money? How many days would you be willing to spend? What quick down and dirty solutions? Like, could we grab a template and use some of those elements as a starting point to do that? Because I definitely get that urge. When I was first starting out in like media generally, doing video production, doing motion graphics, and this is probably like 2006, 2007, one of the first things I ever did, I was paid $500, and I probably worked on this project for like 3 months. So like, how stupid and insane does that sound? But it was new to me. I was like, look, the money was secondary to making contacts, doing real work, putting stuff in the portfolio, and you know, I think the second project I did was maybe $1,000. Now those experiences were so painful, where you're like, it's so painful to do that amount of work for that amount of money. You learn really quickly, like, well, not doing that again, right? That's certainly not worth it. But you do build up. And I was so new, I didn't have a portfolio, so I had no pricing power. Once you have a portfolio filled with good-looking stuff, look, people are coming to you, right? People are coming to us for something that we can do that they can't. We do have the pricing power to an extent. They have their budget, what makes sense for them to spend. And that's the language I like to use with a new client, is like, if they're like, oh, what's this going to cost? It's like, well, what does it make sense for you to spend? Does it make, I'd be happy to sell you a video for $500,000, and we'll go and hire all these incredible artists, and we'll do 3D, and we'll do insane stuff. But it might not make sense for your company to spend that much money on this one-off video that you're going to post on Instagram one time. Like, what does it make sense for your business to actually spend? Then we're going to find a solution as a motion designer and as like a creative director. And if you're working directly with clients, you're a motion designer, but you're also the creative director, right? You're going to have to make all these decisions and really lead projects and work with people who don't know anything about our field. So you take on all those kind of extra roles. And so I think it's okay to even use that term, even if you're newer to it, even if it's your first project. If you have to creatively direct it, well, then that's part of the job title as well. But there's solutions at every price point for the most part, right? All the way down to like a $10 template and some customization. So if you really want to work with somebody, the money, it can certainly be solved. It just makes sense to protect your time and kind of have that key variable figured out, which is this day rate. Now, if you've been in this junior level, and we've had students come through MoGraph Mentor and people that I've hired who, they were charging $350 a day when they first started, and then I come back a year later, and then they tell me, hey, just to give you a heads up, now I'm charging $600 a day. Well, if their work's good, it's like, great, that's excellent. You should be upping those rates. Being in this junior level should only be like a year or two. If you're spending more time at this lower level than a year, maybe not even a year, like that's a big problem. That means you're probably not getting work. You should be doing maybe more personal work. Maybe you should be doing courses and like upping the quality of what you're putting out, because you should be able to jump pretty quickly to this mid-level, to at least this like $500 to $600 range, because we'll see people come out of MoGraph Mentor, the mentorships and stuff, where they've only got a couple pieces, but they're good. They know what they're doing. So they're charging $500 a day. They don't need to do the whole, hey, $300 a day because I'm new. If you can produce the level of quality of a mid-level person, then just get to that point as quickly as you can. Just start charging that amount of money. After you've done a couple of jobs at this lower tier, start charging more, right? 2, 3, 4 jobs at that lower tier. Okay, if those were quality, if those were really good, if the design was solid, universal principles of design, if the animation's good, the principles of animation are there, okay, congratulations, you've graduated to this mid-level. Please start charging that $500 to $600 rate. Then the question becomes, how do I get up to that 1,000? Well, that's more like you do something that's extremely difficult. My friend Enrique Barone, I don't want to give away any of his info, but let's just say he's in that senior level because he's doing traditional hand-drawn 2D character animation. And guess what? There's not that many people who can do it in a real production context. So he's got a lot of pricing power. So the rarity of your skill sets, the level of quality of work you can produce, the quicker you can become that kind of, hey, I do something really difficult, then those prices are going to shoot up a heck of a lot quicker. Or if you're just extremely entrepreneurial and you are organized enough, which sometimes I am, to hire a bunch of other artists to work with you, then now you're a director and you kind of need to charge that $1,000 a day because now the stress is all on you. You're going to have to manage other artists. And then, so accounting for your role in the production is important as well. So a couple of comments here. Really appreciate this, Michael. There are a lot of people talking about this subject in the MoGraph field. Thank you. Thank you for checking it out. Let's see. Thanks so much for this. Can you maybe share the rates from outside of the US if you have any insight there? Yeah, thank you, Jacob. All I know about pricing outside the United States is it's like the Wild West. We have some students in Nigeria and Kenya right now, and the kind of rates they tell me. Anurette in Kenya, she was just telling us that like people will come to her and want a whole 2-minute video and be like, hey, and we have $500, right? So extremely low, right? If you're going to spend 2 months, what is that day rate? $10? Maybe like that's insanely low. So no doubt about it. Inside the United States, rates are going to be dramatically higher. Europe, Australia, parts of South America, big cities in South America, Eastern European countries. I think we're all like a little bit similar. London, UK, and the US, add 15, 20%, but, Rio in Brazil, places in Portugal, places in Eastern Europe, there's a lot of good studios and artists charging very, very similar rates. So I think that's a bit normalized. It's just that in developing countries where the clients themselves don't have the money, that's where I think it's really hard for artists to break through. And then those artists are aggressively trying to work for US companies, or companies inside of the United States or the UK. And so that's a tough position to be in. But, with this new normal of remote working, this maybe has really opened the door for artists in other parts of the world to market themselves to American clients, to British clients, Australian clients, at those rates. And, those clients expect to pay those rates. I think maybe they would feel they should get some slight discount perhaps if you're remote in Kenya or Nigeria, but like the work is the work. I wouldn't be offering some massive discount necessarily just because of your relative cost of living. If you're doing that same quality of work, I think you deserve to get the same amount of money. So Robert, thank you for the question. Your time budget. How much of your work week do you spend on unbillable learning, just trying stuff and exploring new techniques? This is a great question, Robert. Thank you. I'm always spending time tinkering, because I want to be better, right? I want to be a better illustrator, better visual development artist, better director, better at storyboarding, better at 3D character animation, better at 3D rendering. I mean, my only hobby is once my kids go to bed is to sit in front of my computer and tinker and draw and animate. I have no life outside of it. And I think the funny thing about our industry is it's kind of a lifestyle, right? Like the people who go into art and try to be production artists and stuff, the people you see really doing it full time. I mean, it's their love too, right? Like it's all they want to be doing. I did recently get myself a nice little portable easel. So now I can get away from the computer. I can stand in my backyard and paint and draw, do observational drawing, go to the park, do sketching, do watercolor, like mixed media stuff. I'm just constantly doing that kind of stuff because that is my hobby as well. It's just what I like to spend my time doing. But I think it's a big part of it, Robert. I think it's like, how do you explore new areas? How do you grow? Because a lot of times what happened with me, at least, I'll just speak for myself, when it came to client work, once I created some really nice looking 2D kind of infographic-y with some faux kind of 2D, 3D art. And then all of my next project inquiries were like, hey, let's do that same exact thing. So it can be really easy to like fall into doing the same thing over and over. Because if you did it successfully once, then other people are like, hey, great, we'll pay you for that too. Now that's a good place to be because now you can consistently make money. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but then you can feel like you're kind of resting on your laurels or doing the same thing over and over. And that's like you're saying, Robert, that after hours time, unbuilt, like doing the learning, taking classes. I take online courses all the time, right? Like I'm constantly learning from other artists that are willing to share because motion graphics is the most multidisciplinary field of all creative fields. Like I almost, the term motion graphics is almost a curse because people just assume, oh, design, illustration, animation, 3D, 2D, technical direction, simulation, like all these things that are quote unquote motion graphics. It's such a broad field. How will we ever get new skill sets if we're not kind of doing that after hours time? Rabah Muhammad, thank you for the question. Should I learn all aspects of motion graphics like animation, illustration, etc.? Also, any ideas on how to implement what is learned to make it stick to mind? Great question. Should you learn all aspects of motion graphics? That's going to be tough. I think absolutely. Try to learn as much as you can. You're going to have to do it one at a time because, like you say, learn animation. Well, people go to university for 4 years just to study animation. Likewise, people go to school for 4 years just to study illustration. And especially in the United States and in the UK, in Australia, parts of Asia, the big cities, you're competing with people who just spent a huge amount of time studying something really narrow and specific. Like someone who comes out of an art school's illustration program and just did illustration for 4 years, well, their illustration is incredible compared to someone who watched some online perspective drawing and figure drawing tutorials and maybe did it once or twice. Like your skill set looks like a child compared to someone who's gone that far down that rabbit hole. Jacob says, I love that it's so broad. I agree. I love that it's broad too, because it means we can kind of do anything and everything, right? It's such a blank canvas. I'm becoming a big believer that unless you have a real specific specialty, and some people do, like you could fall into that part of the industry where you are just an After Effects animator and you're going to, that means if you have a real hardcore specialty, it often means you have to go work in a team because it's a larger team that can leverage your specific specialty, right? Like you might be the best After Effects animator in the world, but that means you need to go work at a studio where someone else is doing the scripting and someone else is doing the storyboarding and someone else is doing the graphic design-driven art direction that's going to then be given to you, and you apply your skill set to animate that, to bring that to life. So if you're going to go that studio route, then specialty. If you're going to be out there as a freelancer and selling creative services directly to clients, then you'd need a broader skill set. You definitely should learn how to draw. You should definitely learn basic design principles, obviously, if you're going to be designing stuff for screen. And illustration, like everyone should get the art foundations. Everyone should understand perspective drawing. I think that's a fundamental one, right? Because even if you're just doing really simple shapes and stuff, a cell phone on the screen, like just having that basic understanding of perspective when you're doing your boarding, I think is important. Illustration, the ability to draw, is like the shortest distance between the idea in your head and manifesting it in the world is a pencil in your hand, right? Is the ability to just draw that out. So I'm a big believer that motion designers, if you're going to be that freelancer and you're making stuff from scratch for people, learn how to draw and learn about design principles. If you're going to go work in a studio, really lean into your specialty, right? If you're a great After Effects animator, it doesn't really matter if you can draw, right? If you're not doing the storyboards, who cares? So that's, that's kind of, it's just going to depend on where you are. And he says, also, any ideas on how to implement what is learned to make it stick to mind? I mean, just do projects. I definitely think, my favorite kinds of online courses that I take are when there is a project, when you're like, there's a project prompt or there's something really specific that we're doing. Because just like watching a video of somebody else doing something, that stuff tends not to stick, right? Like if I just watch a video of someone do perspective drawing, I'm not going to learn as much as if I actually just like get out my easel and practice over and over and over and fill up a whole sketchbook of all these perspective studies, or go out and do observational, right? I'm looking at my house, and I'm going to do an observational study of my house with proper perspective and proportion. Like those are the moments, by the end of it, I feel like I've learned a lot. So we learn by doing. The best advice I ever got was from Devin Coe. We did a podcast. It was like years ago, maybe like 2011, I think, 2013. And she basically said, all the best, like there's a correlation between being prolific and the quality of your work. And being prolific means producing a lot consistently. So I think that's the key. That's, I think, some of the best advice I've ever heard. And so, I take that to heart, and that's the kind of advice that I pass on to other people. Jacob says, I just finished this book. This topic is Range by David Epstein. Highly recommend. Okay. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah. And right, like it's not 100% certain where this industry is headed. I think I am stressing to everybody who will listen to like invest in the art fundamentals, because the technology is changing so quickly. We don't exactly know what the full applications of our skill sets are going to look like in 10 years, right? Like maybe VR and AR and the metaverse and like whatever is going to be going on 10 years from now might be dominant. Like what if we reach a moment where After Effects animation becomes obsolete for some reason, right? Like After Effects software, you just tell it, hey, animate a sphere, ease in, ease out, and it just does it. So you don't need to, all the stuff we're learning right now about the graph editor and keyframes, that stuff may become obsolete. Like think about the 2D character animators who had to learn about like flipping pages and like painting cells on scans and like a bunch of stuff that's totally obsolete that people spent their entire life learning how to do, that just basically got deleted by technology. One of my first jobs ever in visual effects was as a rotoscope artist. Like that job's basically gone, right? After Effects will just take that background right out now. But the thing that will be constant, no matter the medium 10 years from now, will be the art fundamentals, right? Universal principles of design, principles of animation, color theory, visual metaphor, visual communication concepts. These things are going to hold up whether we're in the metaverse, whether it's a billboard, whether it's a hologram. Like just the principles of form and light and value and color, which drawing and painting goes into so much, those things are going to persist. So it's like those are the things that you should be studying under the surface to build up your artistic foundation. And then whatever happens with the technology, the artists are probably going to just adjust to the new tech and bring with them their artistic expertise, versus being too specifically technical. So a couple more questions. What book do you recommend to someone who is in the first step as a motion designer? Yeah, maybe Austin Shaw's Designing for Motion, I believe it's called. Let's see, make sure I'm giving you the right link. Austin Shaw was a professor at Savannah College of Art and Design. I think it's called Design for Motion. Yeah, Design for Motion. Austin Shaw, who's a really brilliant guy. So this book here, wow, $50, right? Still pretty in demand. Really good, right? And this book is going to tell you exactly what I'm just telling you now, which is like he's going to start with the fundamentals of visual design, composition, asymmetry, emphasis, value, structure, color theory, all those art foundations that then you think about it in a production context, right? Because we're not just creating visual art, we're creating it for animation, we're creating it for a film. So he's got some great tips of like just applying those concepts to kind of like linear media, right? And so we need to design multiple frames. So that's a great book. Jacob also says Animator Survival Kit is a must when starting out. Absolutely. Animator Survival Kit is absolutely another really important one to be looking at, because animation principles are so fundamental and almost like philosophical about motion itself that those principles are gonna hold up no matter what the technology does as well. So Rabah, thank you for this question. Sorry for asking. No, it's okay, but I'm enjoying my time here. Last one. What about the process of analyzing other motion graphics projects to learn from, like Behance or Venmo? That's a great idea, Rabah. And in MoGraph Mentor, when we do our mentorship sessions, a lot of times the discussion is looking at other artists' work and doing a deconstruction. And especially within our 2D art direction group, we'll look at Ariel Costa's work, and then we'll ask a student, describe to me what we're looking at. What is the language that we can use to describe why this works so well, why this looks so good? Once you can describe, once you can put language to what you're seeing, then you've just deconstructed it. Like you just figured out the steps in your own mind of what you would do if you were in a similar situation. So I think analysis of great work is a huge benefit. You see this in art schools. We do it a ton here in MoGraph Mentor because it's really helpful to look at other motion designers' work specifically because we have similar constraints. Again, we're not here designing poster art. We're designing for animation production, and there are real specific constraints to that need to be solved for. So looking at other motion design work that's really, really, really good, and being able to put language to it to say, the line of action on this character is so energetic. It's so dynamic. It's so interesting. Or I love the asymmetrical balance of this composition. I love how there's this larger object over here on the top right and this little object on the bottom left, creating this really interesting energetic balance. Let's say like when we're working in our 2D art direction group, that's a lot of the conversations we're having is doing that kind of deconstruction, because once you've done that, now you're in a position to do that in your own work as well. So I think that's a great place to be thinking. Thank you all so much for hanging out. Check out mographmentor.com. We've got a new subscription service that we're calling All Access. Basically, we got so many messages from people around the world saying, I want to take this class, but I don't have $100, I don't have $200, $300, the kind of money that we're charging for the various training. So we spent the last really 2 years trying to get to this point of saying, how can we make it, a more affordable opportunity for people to get into these classes? So we're doing the $30 a month subscription where you can, if you want to jump in, take the class in 30 days and cancel, well then, that's a win-win, right? You can learn and then move on. The thing that we're most passionate about is doing the mentorships. Like definitely technical training matters, and we've invested heavily in technical training. I watch a ton of technical training. we are artists, but we are also technicians. So there's like a lot to learn, 3D modeling, substance painter, character specific stuff, visual development specific stuff. Like there's so many different things to learn. So the technical training really matters. But the thing that we really focus on is doing the mentorships, is people who get past that introductory phase and they want to go deeper. They want to make better looking work. They want to build a more robust professional portfolio. And so we like to say these are not for beginners. Like go for free on YouTube, do all access, do the cheap stuff to learn a lot of those foundations. But then when, if it makes sense for you at some point to dive into these more intensive mentorship experiences, then that's what we try to focus on. So thank you to everybody who hung out here today to get into this discussion about money and pricing. I know it's a hot topic, and it's something we're going to talk about more here on the YouTube channel, if that's something that you all are looking for. Rabah, thank you so much. Gemini, well, thank you for the kind words, sir. That's very kind of you. Everybody have a great rest of your week. Go out, make some great looking work. Best of luck on whatever projects you're on. And we will see you next week for office hours. I'll be hanging out again if you all are around. Would love to chat. So everybody, have a good one. Thanks for hanging out.